Japanese translation is ready?
It's ready.
Okay.
Everything is checked. So we need a few more seconds.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you are doing all of that because I'm not able to do any of that.
Yeah, because I know some people are just watching us on YouTube. So we Michael, are you here? Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining SCoT or rejoining. Today we are with you with another special series of SCoT webinar, which focus on small communities. Again, as it is within the nature of SCoT webinars. We have a special guest in our satellite webinars today, which is from United Nations World Tourism Organization and their program that is newly launched with small communities. Before I start, I would like to ask Professor Jafari, the curator of SCoT, to enlighten us with an opening remark. Professor Jafar,
well, thank you very much. I add my welcome remarks to yours. Welcome to the webinar series. We have done, those of you who are repeaters, you know that this is not our first or second or third webinar, but almost 60th. It began almost 2 years ago, and we often come up with at least one, if not two webinars per month. What is common among all of them is that they all deal with small communities, small destinations, small operators, rather than large destinations, large operators. And this focus was especially needed because smallness is often neglected in the tourism industry by the government, by institutions, by trade unions, and so on and so forth. And we are being rewarded by having produced that many webinars, and especially today, it's a joint effort with the United Nations World Tourism Organization. They have also many projects, and they also have a special focus, which is new, and that's village tourism, which is perfect subject for our webinar series. Actually, I will mention later on after Sandra has given her remarks. I came back from Lanzarote. I was doing a conference. I gave a talk over there on health, wellness, and tourism. And one of the things I featured in my presentation was village tourism. because truly that is a fantastic concept. And there are village tourism in every country of the United Nations World Tourism Organizations and beyond. So we are all excited to hear the concept and the practice of village tourism through the lenses of UNWTO, which is the leading organization in tourism, and it's the only specialized agency in the United Nations in charge of tourism. With that, I pass on the microphone to Sandra, who will make a complete presentation, and then we would have a conversational continuation. Sandra, it's yours.
Thank you. A very good morning, afternoon, wherever you're following us. Here from Madrid, the headquarters of the World Tourism Organization. I want to thank Professor Jafar Jafari and also Kazem Fadali for this opportunity. It's been great to see the work that has been done with the SCoT webinars. Really, 60 webinars is an amazing achievement in terms of sharing knowledge and also in terms of building community. Building community is probably one of the most important pillars of this kind of development. So the fact that we can all be together today here and we have more than 140 people connected is very, very welcome. Allow me to just give you a little bit of a brief introduction about the UNWTO Best Tourism Villages Initiative. And before I present you the project itself, just to say that obviously tourism for rural development has a huge opportunity to help us spread the benefits of tourism, but also make tourism a benefit for the populations. In 2020, UNWTO has declared the year of tourism and rural development. And obviously, as we did so, we were hit in March by one of the biggest crises that tourism has suffered in its history. So for us, it was also a moment of rethinking what is the role of tourism in this new change that we want to see in terms of post-COVID. By then, UNWTO also celebrated World Tourism Day on this topic, and we released a series of recommendations for governments, the private sector, which were then adopted by our General Assembly on the role of tourism for rural development. And with that in mind, we also worked very strongly, in this case, with the presidency in Saudi Arabia of the G20 that year. And we released a document, which I think it's also a good framework for this approach, which is the ALULA framework for community development through tourism. So with this work in mind, we reached the initiative that I'm going to share with you today. And I think I can share my screen, and I just want to ask if you can see my screen properly.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So with this in mind, UNWTO has launched in 2021 a pilot initiative, which is called the Best Tourism Villages Initiative. What is the Best Tourism Villages Initiative? Basically, it's a way for us to raise awareness and also to recognize those villages where tourism is actually being a driver of rural development, but also of well-being to the populations. And I think this is always our focus. It's always the question of not what you can do for tourism, but what tourism can do for the community as well in a very symbiotic way. So our mission with the initiative is to advance the role of tourism in valuing and safeguarding the villages, their landscapes, their knowledge systems, their biological and cultural diversity, their values, their activities, but also at the same time promote innovative and transformative approaches to tourism in rural destinations. So it's really how both things come together to the benefit of advancing sustainability, either economic, social, or environmental, always, obviously, within our UN framework, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. So our objectives from the rural program overall, but also for the initiative, is obviously that tourism can help reduce regional inequalities in terms of income and in terms of development, fight depopulation, which is a challenge that many countries face, progress gender equality particularly women empowerment, but also youth. Empowering youth in communities is critical to fight depopulation, as we will see, but also women, which are the pillars of ensuring that there is a continuity in the development of the village. At the same time, we want tourism to be a driver of rural transformation in other areas. So through tourism, also, how can we ensure that agriculture is also put in value, handicrafts are put in value, the natural assets are put in value. So really, what is tourism's role in that dynamic? We also value, and you'll see it in the areas of evaluation of the initiative, the importance of multi-level governance. So obviously, tourism takes place in the community, but it needs to be coordinated with either the regional board or a national strategy. If there's no national strategy that puts tourism in rural development as a priority, it will be very difficult to actually achieve some of the objectives that we have. Obviously, we also hope that the initiative can improve the connectivity and all the needs of access to finance and investment for the villages, advance innovation and digitalization, and steer innovation in product development. And sometimes we talk a lot about innovation in technology only, and we really think that there's a huge scope to innovate in offering different experiences, much beyond the issue of technology. And of course, one of the pillars of the initiative is also to promote the relationship between food systems and tourism, because we know that food systems are a critical element in rural areas. So with that in mind, the Best Tourism Villages initiative has 3 pillars. The first pillar is the Best Tourism Villages recognition, and I'll explain a little bit better what that is in a minute. The upgrade program and the Best Tourism Villages network. So what is a Best Tourism Village recognition? The recognition is given to those villages which, after a process of evaluation, and we'll see how the evaluation is done afterwards, are recognized because they have significant cultural and natural assets, but they also work and commit to promote community values, products, lifestyle, and sustainability. So really, it's more than just having the assets, it's what you do with those assets. The second part of the program is the upgrade program. So what happens is the villages that apply, a number of villages are scored into a level which is the recognition. The other villages which are not reaching that score but are very close and have a huge potential enter into what we call an upgrade program, which is followed and mentored by UNWTO and by our partners so that they can improve the areas that have been identified as gaps in the evaluation process. And finally, we have created the Best Tourism Villages Network, which is a network composed of the ones recognized as the Best Tourism Villages, but also the ones in the upgrade program. So this network, currently with 64 villages around the world, what it does is sharing knowledge, experiences, so very much areas where they have excelled in terms of the areas that have been evaluated, but also providing knowledge to others in a very closed circle way. So what are the requisites for application? In line with the UNWTO definition of rural tourism, we have identified, obviously, the level of population density as one of the criteria. And in this case, villages cannot have more than 15,000 inhabitants. This has been a challenge for us because obviously the level of villages in different countries is very different. In some countries, this is a very big population density. In others, it will be very low. But as a universal program, we had to actually ensure that the level is fitting to all the countries around the world. So obviously the village has to be located in a landscape which has an important presence of traditional activities such as agriculture, forestry, livestock, or fishing. so that there is that integration of these activities with tourism and that they share community values and lifestyle. The process is that each UNWTO member state is invited to submit 3 applications, so 3 villages for the process. And why is this process done through UNWTO members? Because you might ask, why can't villages apply directly? So the challenge that we face often in rural tourism is how do we engage also the national government in supporting rural development in terms of infrastructure, in terms of financing, in terms of education, of skills development. So what we wanted is that there is a full engagement by UNWTO member states into this program, which means that they themselves have to go through a process inside their countries where they identify which villages meet these criteria. And that also, first of all, creates a relationship between the villages and the government. And second, brings to the forefront the importance of developing rural tourism with this component. So how are the villages assessed? The assessment is done based on 9 areas of evaluation. The evaluation is done by an independent advisory board, not by the UNWTO Secretariat. The advisory board is constituted of experts from different areas in different parts of the world. And with a scorecard, they give a certain number of points to the specific areas according to the information that is provided by the village. So those are the 9 areas, and I'm going to go a little bit into the detail of them. So the first one is what cultural and natural resources exist in the village. Obviously, intangible and tangible resources, and if they have been recognized by some kind of seal or some kind of certification at national, regional, or international level. The second criteria of evaluation is how the village works to promote and preserve those cultural resources. So what are the activities specifically that are undertaken to achieve that conservation? Third pillar, economic sustainability. So how does the village support the development of businesses? If it's easy to create a business, if there's any support, if there are, for example, incentives at the municipal level, or if there's coordination with the regional level to give incentives, if they give information to the businesses that want to establish themselves there. So what is the support to the economic activity overall? Then we also have the pillar of social sustainability, and here the village is required to share the initiatives that are implemented towards issues such as youth empowerment, women, community engagement, accessibility. So everything that is connected with social sustainability. In terms of environmental sustainability, the principle is the same. We ask village to show how they work towards the conservation of their natural resources, what kind of programs exist, both at public and private sector level as well. And then the sixth pillar runs into what is the current tourism development of the village itself. So what is the integration of tourism in the value chain? Are there access to local experiences? Are there access to local products? Is the development of accommodation in line with the local values and with the local offer? Is the village promoting itself? So everything that has to do with the tourism development. Finally, the 3 final areas of evaluation are the governance and how the village or the municipality gives priority to tourism. So is there a structure that actually takes care of tourism, either public, private, an NGO, public-private, community-based organization? So is there something of a governance structure that engages the community in the decisions? And also, what is the coordination of the community with the different levels of government in the country? Finally, we look into issues of infrastructure, of connectivity, which obviously are important. because not only for the presence of the village, but especially connectivity. How do you reach the village, and easy to access? And here we know that obviously this criteria are very different levels of development according to the country. So when we do the evaluation, we have that into consideration. So not all villages are scored the same way, depending on where they're located and depending on the development index. We look into those criteria with a different perspective. Finally, health, safety, and security, which obviously has become a critical issue now with COVID. If it was important before, I think COVID has shown us that health has to be placed at the heart of tourism development and cannot be something that we have just in mind on our side. So the process of application is, as I mentioned, member states are the ones pre-selecting the villages that they want to present. So the 160 UNWTO member states. Then we do a review at the Secretariat, which is basically aimed at making sure that the candidacies are in line with all the administrative procedures. And finally, the evaluation is done by the advisory board, as I mentioned. The announcement of the villages that were selected last year was done at our General Assembly in December. We had 44 villages selected, plus 20 in our upgrade program from the different regions of the world. And this year, we also foresee that the announcement will be made towards the month of December at a specific UNWTO event. So just to finalize, and I always like to stress this because often people think about a best tourism village as a nice village, very nice resources, but it's really much more than that. For us, a best tourism village is really a village that's committed to use tourism as a positive tool in terms of developing their culture, their preservation, but also the well-being of their community, that protects actually and promotes its nature and its culture, that puts value into its gastronomy, its people, its crafts, also that promotes entrepreneurship. And here it can be social entrepreneurship, not necessarily, as I mentioned, only focus on the technology side, that puts the community at the center of the development. And at the end of the day, that really aims to make sure that tourism is a force for the well-being of residents and visitors, which sometimes is a difficult balance, but this is really what we aim. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to try and show you a video if technology helps me and allows me to do so, which is always challenging. Although
Shall I do it for you?
Yes, if you can do it, because
Yes.
I will appreciate it.
No problem.
Although we've been in 2 years of Zooms and Teams and all other kinds of systems, sometimes technology fails us.
It's a beautiful video, and I hope the sound also worked well.
Nuestro pueblo es parte de lo que somos.
Es parte de nuestras raíces y nuestra cultura.
كثير
هي ماضينا وهي مستقبلنا.
每一个游客都是我们的朋友。
Prav vsak gost lahko najde razlog za nasmeh.
Gammachuu guddaatu nutti dhaga'ama.
Y para ofrecer nuestra mejor gastronomía.
Para mostrarles los alrededores.
E ver os sorrisos nos rostos deles.
Para nous découvrir un trésor qu'ils amènent, tu peux imaginer.
Наш край є наш дом.
كل واحد كيحترمها.
y a todos quienes quieran compartir
as nossas tradições.
여러분 모두를 환영합니다.
Μοιράζομαι σημαίνει αναπτύσσομαι.
Dufatanyije twese twarema ubucuti hagati yacu.
Kangeşmas!
Kültürümüz.
Doğamız, unser Erbe.
Kanthi paningalan netra, gesang sarwa endah.
Al turismo fa par da noi altri.
Et de ce que nous voulons être.
Alin hamokuitan koikichis.
Καλώς ορίσατε.
Bienvenidos.
Welcome.
Welcome.
欢迎来到
nei migliori villaggi turistici.
Bienvenido a los mejores pueblos turísticos.
Thank you very much, Kazem. And just to say that those were the selected ones last year. We just opened a selection process currently. The deadline for applications by UNWTO member states is the 28th of June. And we do hope to have much more villages joining us as well, and also allowing us to promote the initiatives that they're doing. For those interested, you can follow us on social media, Best Tourism Villages, where we share also the initiatives that the different villages put in place. And I think that is the best way that we can value what they do and contribute to show the world that it is possible to use tourism as a tool for rural development. Once again, thank you so much to the invitation to UNWTO to be in the SCoT webinars. It's a pleasure. I'm sure that each of you in your villages has an amazing story to tell. And as we advance and we grow this project, we hope that, I always say, in 5 years' time, we look back and we have a growing number of people who place this as a priority in their agenda. So thank you, Kazem. Thank you, Jafar, and back to you.
Thank you, Sandra. It is a wonderful event. In the beginning, I was not really concentrated because of so many technical things, and I'm not that young to deal with all these technologies, but now I have more concentration, and your presentation brought me back to my area of research in rural. I personally have been spending a majority of my time with villages and rurals, and I would like to start from Japan first because I'm living here. And your initiative is saying to fight with depopulation. And this is what is our problem of Japanese traditional landscape of Satoyama. Sato is a village and Yama is mountain. You know, the majority of Japanese villages are mountainous village. They're in upland. And due to the industrialization, a lot of migration happened to big cities, and those who are left in the village are in average, let's say in 70s now. So there's a big worries in the future. And because life, or let's say the livelihood based on traditional agriculture doesn't make enough to live. And tourism as a catalyst can bring more income and make the livelihood of Satoyama villages more possible. So in your initiative, you said fighting with depopulation, but I know that in other countries, somehow it's not the case, and there are many young people in villages. So how do you comment on this in general? as a person who look at the villages from a world perspective.
Thank you, Kazem. It's very interesting to see, obviously, the different situations in different regions. For example, depopulation is a major challenge, obviously, in many developed countries, in Japan, in Europe, definitely here in Spain, where UNWTO is. It has become one of the priorities of the government to actually work towards creating conditions in rural areas for retaining population. But I think it's also a challenge in many other countries because when you look at Africa or look at Latin America, you also see the same challenges. Why? Because the roots of depopulation are often lack of economic opportunities, lack of possibilities to develop businesses, lack of services. So it is looking at the root of the population that we will find also how tourism can help that, because often you won't have basic services, so or schooling or opportunities to raise your children. So it's very much how can we create economic activity in a way that for one side supports those services to exist, but also creates enough population capacity that those services will make sense to be in those villages, or create innovative ways to reach those villages with those services, which now also with technology, with mobility. But I think it's actually a challenge that goes very much across the board. And for example, when you think about Africa, which is one of the youngest regions in the planet, how do we provide opportunities for young people to develop new businesses in their villages and to actually support the villages' development? So I do think it's a question that goes just beyond what we might think is an issue in Japan or in Europe.
Thank you, Sandra. Just not only the material and PowerPoints that you showed, the video also, it's showing that each region and each village has its own authentic culture and authentic resources to be shared and learned. I personally was watching the video, taking it back and forth, and I learned how to climb a tree without using spikes and injure the tree. So I think you or your initiative approach focus on a bottom-up approach. You work directly with local communities. And I am not quite sure if they are able to propose and to present what they have, because they have much more than what they sometimes can present. Do you provide support and how it or what the system exists for excellent villages that they can appeal themselves and put the proposal in?
Thank you, because as I mentioned, the initiative was born in a structured way that we want to engage the governments at national level. So it's not open for presentation by the villages themselves. It is open for the villages to contact their countries if they think they meet this criteria, if they think that they excel in this criteria. We need to think that there is various villages that are presenting themselves, and also all the documents of candidacy can be consulted in the UNWTO Best Tourism Villages website. So villages can see exactly what kind of information is required for them. And you will see that the application form is quite comprehensive in touching each of the areas of evaluation, in asking the villages to provide specific examples of what is being implemented in these different areas. But the process is, I would say, bottom up, aiming at an increased coordination between national and local levels, because we consider that the intervention of national governments in promoting in advancing rural development is critical. So we need to foster that relationship. And with this initiative, it has been very interesting. Last year, we actually had meetings with governments where they said, oh, you know, we learned so much about some of our villages that we did not know. So it's also very important to steer this relationship. And this is why the initiative itself is obviously open to villages around the world, but they will need to work to present their candidacies always through their Ministry of Tourism or the agency that's responsible for tourism in each of the countries.
Thank you, Sandra. So if I summarize my understanding and learning, it's not only sharing knowledge between countries, but also within the countries. And it bring collaboration between private and public sector within the countries. I just saw, again, the example is from Japan because I'm based in Japan. I saw call for proposals in Japan a few weeks ago, and I know you are accepting these proposals. And just today before this webinar, there was a webinar talking about a showcase from Hokkaido, Japan. Thank you very much. My third question before I pass it to Jafar. Jafar is very quiet, but I'm sure that he's preparing a list. Is that tourism and the role of tourism in a tourism village? Are we giving tourism a dominant role in livelihood and lifestyle, or we are going to preserve and conserve the authentic livelihood and lifestyle of the community through tourism?
Thank you, Gazem. I think this is probably the core discussion of all tourism development these days, either in a village, in an urban setting, or in a coastal area. It should be both things. Obviously, we don't want tourism to become the main activity, also because any dependence on a specific economic activity is naturally a risky one in terms of the balance of any community or any country to that point. But we know that there's a concept of bringing innovation, for example, to preserve some of the products that exist traditionally, bringing innovation to gastronomy, where you can use traditional products and cook them in a new way, or you can cook them in a traditional way but present them in a new way. I think there has to be this approach of saying tourism has to be a tool to preserve and promote those values, but also we need to be market oriented because we need that the tourism sector develops. And for the tourism development to be achieved, for example, we probably need technology. People today, they will look for their destinations online. So if we are not present, and for example, one of the things that works very well, and we've seen that in many countries, is clustering of different villages that might have common traits, for example, and creating routes and promoting themselves together. So I think there is a need to have both approaches together so that they can mutually benefit each other.
Thank you, Sandra. I want to stop here and pass it on to Jafar, and then I'll come back again. Jafar, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me begin with Sandra's presentation. It was very comprehensive. As an academician, I find this very comprehensive. You defined it, you framed it, and you documented it, not only in the sense of words, but also visual. So it was a complete presentation. And as using the word that Kazem often uses, I learned a lot myself. This is a good learning experience. By the way, we learn as much as the people participating in the webinar. One thing that sometimes may weaken our discussion on this very important topic is that some people may think that talking about small villages here and there is too much of attention. Well, I use the concept of small village or village tourism with farm tourism, with rural tourism, with off-the-road tourism. If you add these up together, this is more than 50% of the tourism industry. People don't realize that. And because they're small, they're ignored and they go away. And that is hurting the whole business of tourism industry as well. And governments are also ignorant about this, that is small, when you add it up together, it becomes large. If I may, Kazim, I would like to go to your comments, which was taken off from Sandra's presentation. You mentioned about youth and depopulation and the role of tourism in holding on to the youth so they don't have to go away. Yes, this is very, very important. So not only village tourism or small tourism holds on to the youth and have them engaged, but we should also recognize that village tourism promotes local products and local services. And that is in turn generating additional jobs. So obviously they want to use their own potatoes and tomatoes and meats and so on and so forth in order to serve the tourists, and that strengthen the economy. And the part we should be concerned about the youth, but we should be also concerned about the older generation. Village tourism is also important for holding on, engaging retired, if I may use that word, or older generation, by having them to be engaged in artifacts, embroidery, making, doing things. I've seen it in many countries which are doing that. There are workshops of older people who congregate every morning, every day in a place. They make things and the tourists are allowed to come and watch them. And some of them even sell their own products depending on the government's rules and regulations. This way, the older generation are engaged. So I think if we think about it, perhaps small tourism or village tourism has this capacity of holding on to the youth and holding on and engaging the retired individuals. So I thought this point should be made accentuated about the value that small tourism has. Also, you both talk about authenticity in tourism, in village tourism. This is really the key concept. And I evaluate, because of my academic background being in cultural anthropology, what makes village tourism or small tourism colorful, important, appealing, is because it is itself, or we call it authentic. This is one of the cases that tourism emphasizes people to be yourself. Be yourself. Be yourself. In other places, in large tourism, we train and educate people to be somebody else. But in authentic tourism, in a village tourism, we are telling them, you don't have to do things any differently. Just be yourself. And this is what the tourists want. The tourists are coming from larger cities with millions of population, etc. They want simplicity. They want smallness. They want to go back to the past, back on dealing with the present, authenticity, the way people do things or have been doing things. This is another thing that I wanted to emphasize, and both of you brought it into our thinking. Thank you very much. Now in form of question, I would like to add and especially get comments from Sandra and Kasim. As already noted, we have done about 60 webinars. And I have learned from all of them. And I realized just recently, a few months ago, that in tourism, we had the famous S's of tourism, sand, sea, etc., and one I'm not going to mention. But those are going to be in place after COVID-19. But there are new S's that I have witnessed coming up, not in the beginning with S, but they imply that. And I have that list. I have created that list of new S's that will be operating after COVID-19. The first one is safety, the matter of safety. And actually, because of safety and security and sanitation, UNWTO and WHO became even closer collaborator thanks to this issue or thanks to tourism. So safety, sanitation, security always has been an issue in tourism, war, conflict, etc., and security in the sense of food being secured in the total sense. Services. Now, in the case of small tourism, local services, authentic services. Of course, they need to meet international standards, no doubt about it. But they don't change color and flavor and shape and appearance, but they bring on board standardization of the understood globally. The next is sympathy. Sympathetic relationship between host and guest. And host and guest in small villages have more opportunity of being in touch with each other than in larger communities. And therefore, they need to understand better, especially now that because of safety, security, etc., the mentality of the tourist is somewhat different than it used to be. So we need to re-educate the workforce in tourism about the new mindset of the tourists and the mindset that they have to be in it. And this requires additional training. Another is small. Small is beautiful. As you know, that this phrase was coined in 1970s by Schumacher. And as of today, small is beautiful. And this is what the tourists really want. And so smallness is something that communities have been. And finally, sustainability has been with us before. It's going to be now even more with us. And village tourism are more sustainable in every sense that you can imagine. And sustainability agrees then with the guidelines of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the new ones. When I talk about sympathetic relationship, it's not just host and guest relationship. It's also within the work community, among the employees of the tourism industry. That chemistry needs to be understood as well. There's some background noise. I don't know if everybody has that background noise or not. So coming to you, Sandra. What are some of the things that tourism villages should do differently post-COVID-19 era, which it seems that it has began, or we want to say that it has began? I'm talking to you from Mallorca. If Mallorca is a case, tourism has returned. Tourism is here already in volume. Yesterday, I came from Lanzarote in Canary Islands. If I can take that as a second case, tourism has returned. almost fully in the case of Canary Islands and Mallorca as well. I've been talking to the managers of hotels, and they are not complaining about occupancy rate anymore. They are very happy about it. So tourism, everything indicates that it's on its way back after 2 years of hibernation. Sandra, what are the new perspectives that we need to take along with us in order to have a better tourism industry? And let me add, I'm not looking for theory. I'm really looking for practice. I confess, all my life, I was in the business of creating knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but I have passed that period in my career. Now, for me, knowledge is for the sake of application. I'm not really interested in the knowledge for the sake of knowledge anymore. We have plenty of that. There are warehouses of knowledge everywhere, and they're collecting dust. So I'm interested in having knowledge for the sake of application. And therefore, I would like to hear some practical comments from you, Sandra, and from Kazim, the new ways that a small tourism industry needs to think about itself, manage itself, and operate.
Thank you, Davarin. Thank you so much for the reflections, very on the point and the challenges that we face. I think there's different levels, and we are an intergovernmental organization, and I think we need to make sure that we address this issue at all levels, because you need to have different regulation, for example. You were talking about practical cases. I was just reading about the Balearic Islands' new legislation on working conditions for the tourism sector. So this is an area we need to have in mind. At the global level, governments have a role in policies, either by setting incentives for the transformation of the sector, either by setting regulations and standards. So we need that level to exist. At the same time, we need, obviously, big corporations to act. Often they will have the increased capacity to act. They'll have the knowledge, they'll have better financial means than SMEs. And then we have small businesses, which we all know are the major part of our sector. So there we also need policies that support those small businesses. We've seen how during the crisis, governments have stepped up to support the existence of the sector with employment schemes, with financial support. And that has been critical for the survival of our sector. At the same time, we need each of us to change. There was a very interesting discussion. We had a high-level debate on tourism in the General Assembly last week. And someone was saying, we're all looking at tourism and we forget we're tourists. We're all tourists. So we all take decisions, and we all take decisions that impact our sector. So there's no solution fits all. Each situation is different. But the truth is, on one side, consumers are demanding that change. We know also, particularly younger people, they want companies to be taken for the words. It's not just saying, I'm very committed. It's really showing what is your impact on the community, what is your impact on the environment. They also have the power of social media, so they can create a movement or create a brand or destroy a brand or a destination in no time. So I think it's really our challenge is to put all the pieces together, and that each of those pieces works towards that development. I also think there's an important point here, which is we've reached obviously levels of tourism demand in some places where there are congestion issues, and those need to be managed. And when you talk about small places, there's the risk as well when we talk about rural tourism and rural development. And obviously, we want the rural communities to benefit, but there need to be at the core of that development. It's not creating demand with no limits. And I think this is a very important point, obviously, because those communities are even more fragile in their size and their social structure. So I think this is an important point. The second one, I think you're talking about practical examples. We've seen in some cases, and it's not because I'm Portuguese, but one of the villages that is with us is part of something called Historical Villages of Portugal. And they've created a cluster among them where they work on different issues. So they work on, the inclusion of gastronomy and tourism demand, in marketing, in sustainability. And I think particularly for smaller communities, the cluster approach is basic because it's very difficult, like an SME, to actually do something probably with the resources that the community has. I also think that sometimes we forget that our grandparents were much more sustainable than we were. So there's a lot of practices that if we recover them, we're actually contributing to that objective. And I think villages in that sense have an immense opportunity. But there's obviously this point of each of us has a role, and this can only be advanced if each of us plays that role, either governments, either social companies, either NGOs or private sector.
Sandra, if I may come back to your very last point, you mentioned government. And earlier point I made that more than 50% of tourism is a small business. And we think always big is better. It's not, it should not be the case. The only institution that has the ears of the governments in tourism is UNWTO. And I think already UNWTO has began the discussion, the idea, rural tourism, best tourism village, etc., etc. I think through the microphone of UNWTO, through the voice of UNWTO, governments need to wake up to the reality of small is beautiful. Well, I'm saying that based on experience, and you have the same experience yourself. You know, government in some countries, their goal is to build the next 50-floor hotel and the sort of things. Their goal is not to spread tourism across the country into the small communities. And that is where the benefit of tourism is. This is what the tourist wants. This is what the local people can benefit from, spreading the wealth and well-being of tourism. So I hope we can. I hope UNWTO would use even more other ways of communicating the importance of a small business tourism, rural tourism, village tourism, off-the-road tourism, and not just big tourism. And I know WTO is moving in that direction. I just wanted to add my voice to support the new thrust in this area. I wonder if you have any further comment or elaboration on this, and Kazem probably has some comments as well.
Thank you, Jafar. I think, as I was saying, it's a trend that obviously was already there. I think it comes with the need for people to go back to authenticity, to local products, to nature, and the pandemic has accelerated that trend. And it's an opportunity, obviously, with its challenges, but an opportunity. And I think there's on our side, there's one thing, as you mentioned, first of all, influencing governments, influencing in a positive way, as I always say. And influencing is demonstrating, for example, that tourism in rural areas is important. So the moment we put the spotlight on those villages, and one of the villages, for example, we took them, the mayor, well, the vice mayor, it was a lady, young lady, we took the vice mayor to the General Assembly debate with the president of the General Assembly and 50 ministers last week to New York. So those are the examples. Obviously, there's many more villages in the world which are doing the same. And there's an interesting question in the chat saying, okay, but how do we promote all the others? And it's like, well, we're creating, and hopefully we're creating the buzz. We want this to become something that people talk, and not just us. We want to set agenda, but we will be successful when each and every government puts this as a priority, when each government has a framework for rural development, when each government has a structure where they coordinate with agriculture, with territorial development, with the different ministries in implementing tourism, because it's also not only a tourism issue. And this is also one of the challenges we have. It's a question that often touches a lot of other issues. So we need to make sure that that alignment is there. So for us, this is putting it on the agenda. Then obviously we have very specific activities. We have the Best Tourism Villages Initiative. We will have this year, towards the end of the year, the first global UNWTO conference on tourism and rural development. So we want to bring this discussion at a different level. We are working obviously with different organizations, with the World Bank, with the ADB in Asia, to see how do we advance this agenda in financing, because UNWTO is not a financial institution. So if we put this in the agenda, we want more financial mechanisms to exist in the Asian Development Bank, in the World Bank, that actually go into this direction. And at the same time, obviously, UNWTO's role is, as you say, to create knowledge, but knowledge that is practical. So the Best Tourism Villages is a practical example of how actually you can do this on the ground. And if we don't bring the ministries into it, it's going to be very difficult, because if you don't have a road to get to this village, is very difficult. If that village doesn't have electricity, it will be very difficult. If there is no internet, how can the accommodation be present in booking systems or someone booking directly? So it's all that for us is very important in bringing those two worlds together, which have been often very apart. And it's very rewarding to see, as I said, that this starts to be a priority.
Thank you, Sandra. Jafar always talk about bridging theory and practice, and I think your initiative is just exactly a perfect practice of bridging theory and practice. You mentioned about our grandpas and grandmas. They conserved it and they knew about sustainability. And yes, actually, it is the fact that we have the destinations now is because they conserved it and they passed it on. So, and we have a lot of doubt that we can also keep it and pass it on again. We have over 200 people here, 219 I can see, and a number of people on YouTube. We have some questions that if I summarize a few of them, they are implying that how can we enhance the role of NGOs and NPOs in helping or working with local communities and small villages to approach this program. Is it necessary or compulsory to be the government only? And I think it's also misleading sometimes. They're thinking that the land and ownership should be governmental or local government. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Thank you, Kazem. I think we have many examples of the ones that actually entered this year program where the candidacy facility was prepared by an NGO working on the ground with the community, NGOs who have long been in the community helping tourism development and who actually serve as the driver of development. What the initiative entails is that it can be prepared by the NGO, it can be prepared by whoever is best fit to explain and prepare a good candidacy, but to arrive to UNWTO, to present it, it needs to go through the government. Why? Again, because of what I was saying. It's very, very important for us as an intergovernmental organization to actually have the government support this agenda. Because if the government supports this agenda, they will give visibility to this topic. They will help develop the infrastructure. They will probably look into a regulation that helps community tourism. So we want to create that bridge. As I said, this is just one of the programs that UNWTO has. We're currently in the process of establishing a new program for tourism and rural development out of the Regional Support Office of UNWTO in the Middle East, which is located in Saudi Arabia. And there will be many other programs for villages coming out of that. Keep posted. We will be announcing them soon. And they will be aimed directly at villages with different objectives, which will be revealed in time. This initiative specifically, we really wanted governments to get engaged because we feel that we need that support. We need infrastructure, we need investment, we need often regulation. For example, one of the things that has come in rural development more often is regulation for accommodation, for example. You know, in how do you invest in accommodation and make it something that is according to the needs of regulating that activity at national level or at local level, depending on where the regulation is being developed. So we cannot have these two worlds separate. And for us in this initiative, as I said, this is just one of the initiatives that UNWTO has. More will be coming up as we build our program for tourism and rural development. But it would be very important that we have governments that are also, as I said, in the discussion, we had really interesting points of governments telling us, oh, you know, they were not selected, but now we're doing a project with them for this, this, and this, because there is a relationship that didn't exist before.
Thank you, Sandra. Again, there are questions in the chat, and I want to ask you and represent some of the questions. That is there any limit of the number of best tourism villages from one country? I know this initiative is very new, and you have already designated a few from each country. So where it goes?
There is, well, the limit is 3 candidacies per country each year. So each year we can add new ones. As you've seen last year, we've recognized 44. And basically they're the ones that reach a certain score. So if they reach that number of points, then they are recognized. And we also recognized and engaged with 20, which are part of the upgrade program. In the upgrade program, we are having individual meetings with each of the villages with the objective of having a mentoring program with them to work on the areas that could be improved to reach the other areas, because sometimes you have a village which is very strong on one pillar but might not be developing the other one. And really the initiative aims to recognize, it's not an award, and I think this is important, it's not an award for a specific initiative, it's really an approach to tourism development in the village. And this is why all the areas are important.
Thank you, Sandra. Just to make sure that we include the voice of people who are watching us on YouTube. If you give me a few seconds, I would like to ask everybody go to Menti. I also put it on the chat, menti.com, and enter this code. Then you can write your keywords here, and we will see the beautiful board that will be created by you all, and we see how we are thinking together. Okay, I go back here. And as was mentioned by you, this is a new initiative, and I'm sure that UNWTO is going to enhance it. And it won't be your last version of it. So what do you think in the future you can do that you can make it more accessible, or you can create a platform that this knowledge can be shared in different areas, not only tourism? Because one of the participants is asking that, do you have any specific program for environmental conservation? Best tourism villages are good at being a destination, but they might have also a very special technique for conserve the environment, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazem, and thank you for the question. Definitely, this is really one of the, I would say, different things about the initiative is that we value the activities that are done to promote and preserve environment, the culture, the social structures, and the objective is, now that we have identified the villages which are better position to share knowledge in a certain area, that we can bring that knowledge out. So we're starting a series of activities where the villages can present and share what they are doing. And for example, in environmental accessibility, we have some villages who have put accessible tourism as one of the priorities, for example, others who are working more on the environmental component, others on the gastronomy component. So with that mapping, we will be able to actually showcase each of them in a way that is accessible to all. I think going into the future, we do hope, first of all, that the inspiration makes people look at rural tourism in a different way. So I always say in 5 years' time, we hope that this network is growing and growing, but that they can also be spinboards in their own country for other villages, because I think this is also very interesting. And I'll give you an example, actually, of one of the countries where the villages actually had never met. And so their tourism people said, oh, it's so nice because now we know each other and we can exchange information. So even at that level, this is something that we hope that the initiative can bring. Creating that sense of community, creating that movement, and also obviously putting in the spotlight a lot of the challenges that exist for rural tourism. I think, it's not all an easy path. Someone is asking in the chat, for example, a very important point. How do you deal with a situation where there's people in the village that want tourism and others that don't? Consultation needs to be put in place. Do you go for the majority? Where do you put the limits? So this is something, for example, when we evaluate the villages on the governance side, that we also consider, is the village part of that consultation in tourism development? I think there's no yes or no question. Each village will be different. And it will have to be always, I like very much the concept of local. I think there are global issues and local solutions, and they need to actually be localized often, because there's no one size fit all. We can learn from each other. There's good solutions that can be piloted, but they always have to be taken into consideration where you are, and what is the history, what is the community, what are their objectives into the future, and where tourism fits in those objectives.
If I may jump in, Qasim, you mentioned local, Sandra. Well, we are fortunate that we have done 2 webinars on globalism and tourism. So you see, we are exactly on the same page when it comes to this subject. I want to emphasize one point here, because we emphasize many points. involvement of government, recognition of government, resources, infrastructure, airports, you name it. We emphasize the importance of all of those. But now I'm putting my academic hat on and say, we need to emphasize human resources development. This is the engine. This is the engine in tourism. And well, maybe in the urban tourism, urban setting, there's more education training going on. But which governments are doing what for the small villages, etc., small communities? And that needs to be emphasized. I mean, the failure of tourism is basically in the area of lack of training. And the issue with some governments is that they consider training as an expense. It is not. It is an investment. And this is the way it should be thought about. So, and now I know the next person is going to ask you, Sandra, does UNWTO have any training programs? Yes. For ages has been doing education and training, but perhaps Sandra, you want to add something about on this point as well.
Thank you. Sandra, if I may intervene, our translation team will finish their job in a few minutes. So if in our Japanese room you have any question, you can just send it to chat in Japanese and we will take care of. Thank you very much. Sandra, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ghassan. I think obviously, well, education and training and skills are critical. And this is, again, one of the pillars that we evaluate. If there's specific programs where you develop skills for the sector, for the community itself. I always think about, for example, a story that we had from Ecuador of someone who started a rural business and, a very small business and feeding tourists and providing for meals. And it's a lady, and she used to say, in the beginning, I didn't have enough spoons. I had to go to all the villages to ask for spoons because there were so many people, I didn't have enough spoons at home. So, all those things, it's more than, it's really bringing the skills to the local ground. And here, NGOs have a critical role, for example, and there's amazing NGOs doing really, really amazing work at the local level in training people. But obviously the NGOs also need financing. And this is where we want this to become a priority for governments and say, if I cannot give training because training might not be accessible, I need tools to act on the ground, and I need to support these different ways of training and getting the training to reach the local communities, which is a challenge. We know many communities are in remote areas, very difficult access. And again, this is what I was talking about, the cluster approach. I think this is also a very important point, because if you get villages to work together, then it's also training different villages at the same time. So I think, well, training could not be more emphasized. I think also today with the online opportunities, one of the things, for example, we're doing with the network is giving them training to the villages, but also to all the stakeholders in the village. So the businesses, whoever wants to join. And we're starting with training on social media development, on environmental and plastics. So this is one of the ways that I think we can also add value.
Thank you, Sandra. If I can have a small summary of our session, we are going to continue this webinar with a showcase from your side. And in next webinar, we are going to exactly go to the field and see how people are doing in village level and how these lessons can be learned. But I am also thinking of educating our communities using or utilizing the material of your website, because the website has everything in it. You have the sample application forms, people can download it and start working on it, and they submit it to their government and so on. you have any plan in future to add more languages to the website?
Thank you, Kazem. Currently, the documents in the website are available in English, Spanish, and French. That covers 3 of the 5 UNWTO official languages. We're missing Arabic and Chinese, which is quite a big effort and difficult for us. But obviously, we keep it in Russian. Sorry, we keep it in mind, and we mentor our member states in the different countries also to make sure that there is an understanding. Just yesterday, we did the French webinar with all the member states in Africa and went through the forum so they know exactly how to apply. There's also an important point here. Applications are have to be seen by an advisory board. So translation of applications is not advisable because we think a lot of information can be lost, because obviously the moment you translate, it's difficult to keep the spirit of the application. And the advisory board needs to be able to read them in a language that is common to all.
Thank you, Sandra. If I want, as I promised, to show the words of our participants, here are some of them. And we have another board that is full of questions. So if you let us, our SCoT team are going to summarize the questions and send it to you later.
Perfect. And again, for all those who are here, you can reach us as Tourism Villages at UNWTO. Also, and in social media, Twitter and Instagram, our accounts are there. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions or any doubts that you might have. And I think it's very interesting, the word count. I like the concept of having community at the center. So very, very, very good.
Thank you very much. Let me ask Jafar if is there any final remark, or from the audience also, if you have questions, please continue sending it in the chat. We have still a few more minutes.
Well, you're asking if I have anything to add. I think this is we just started talking about the subject. It's very important subject, and I want, on behalf of the SCoT, I want to formally invite UNWTO to have a follow-up session jointly. And if I may, Sandra, and if you accept the invitation, I would like the next webinar part 2 be a bit more practical, in the sense that I would like you to invite a representative from some of the villages who got the best award, for them to tell us what they did to gain this recognition, and how this recognition has shaped their productivity and perspective. Basically along those lines, so people see the value. This recognition is not a certificate they put on the wall. This recognition is revibrate the engine of the tourism in the village, in the community. So I think if you agree, we could have 1, 2, 3 persons from different countries who got the not only last year but maybe before that. So we get something from the people who actually sought it and they got it and are enjoying. Do you think we could do such a webinar?
Of course, Jafari, I think that's very welcome for all of us, that first of all, they can share their own experiences, as I said, learning by doing in practical things. So I think we look forward for organizing such a webinar and bringing some of the villages as much as possible with the diverse background in terms of regions and also experiences, so that that can be showcased.
And in addition to that, for example, some elementary questions that I would like to ask, but not to be answered now. If we are a village and we are interested in the concept of best village, etc., should villages begin first with domestic tourism and then go international, or should they jump into international? I know this sounds a simple question, but I think there's more into this question than we may think about it. For example, would be interesting to see the history of the villages who got the recognition. For how many years they were in tourism? Did they begin with domestic tourism? Are they still doing domestic tourism? Are they predominantly international tourism? And so on and so forth. And that would be also something very important, because there are many villages out there who are basically have started getting domestic tourism, or even not domestic nationally, domestic from the neighborhood area type of things. So these are the things I would like us to think about, and for the audience to get engaged with us.
So we keep those questions on the sleeve, as they say, and we'll ask them to the villages, and so they can tell us exactly what their perspective. I can tell you mine, but I think we can better hear from them.
Well, I'm planting questions for the audience to pop them up next time. Kazem, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sandra and Jafar. It was a very harmonious symphony of local community, traditional knowledge, and sustainability. And the most promising news is that we are going to continue. We have just started. So congratulations to a good start. And Sandra, we won't let you be free. You're making you and your colleagues more and more busy, because we, as you see, we have still 217 people here and more in YouTube that they are willing to learn from your beautiful initiative. For those who want to watch the video of this webinar later, please visit our YouTube channel, and you will find all the videos available for free for everyone. Thank you so much again for being with SCoT webinars, and we invite you to participate in next webinars of SCoT. Thank you again, and a good evening to everybody from Japan.
Yes,
thank you, Kazem. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great pleasure to be here today, and we look forward for the next session with some of the villages. And my colleague Patricia has just put our contact email in the chat, so anyone can reach us by email as well.
Yes, visit our website, and soon we will announce the date of the follow-up webinar. And maybe the next one is not just the last one, but actually the beginning of a series that we would do, because the small is big. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.